Apollo 11 moon landing, the day America achieved humanity's first. Introduction? July 20, 1969. Humanity witnessed the greatest moment in its history. On that day, when the first human footprint was carved into the surface of the moon, 600 million people around the world gathered in front of their televisions, holding their breath and watching. It was America that left that footprint. The story we're about to tell you today is about an American engineer who helped create that historic moment. His name was William Bill Spencer, a 42-year-old NASA aerospace engineer at the time. He wasn't simply a technician. He was one of countless patriots who turned America's dream into reality. In the midst of the Cold War, in the fierce space race against the Soviet Union, America claimed the glorious title of humanity's first. And behind it were thousands of Americans like Bill. People who worked day and night, who weren't afraid of failure, who ran toward only one goal. Now we begin that story. The record of that brilliant moment, when America carved its name into the world, and into space itself. This is a story of American pride, American determination, and American achievement that changed human history forever. Part 1 Prologue: A Nation Looking Up at the Sky. I was born in 1927, in a small farming town in Iowa. The first time I looked up at the sky, I was 6 years old. My father held me on the barn roof and pointed to the stars in the night sky. "Bill, look there. Do you know how far away those stars are? But we Americans will go there someday." At the time, it just sounded like my father's big talk. But those words were carved deep in my heart. In the 1940s, the world was in the whirlwind of war. I was 16 when I heard the news of the Pearl Harbor attack on the radio. All of America was enraged and united. We armed ourselves with the spirit of "we can do it." I was too young to participate in the war, but instead I decided to study engineering. I knew that protecting America wasn't just about guns. After the war ended, America became the leader. That lifted up the devastated world. The Marshall Plan, the Bretton Woods system, the birth of the United Nations. We didn't just win, we created a new world order. I wanted to be part of that America. In 1950, I received my aerospace engineering degree from MIT and joined NACA, NASA's predecessor. At the time, America was leading the world in jet engine technology. Chuck Yeager had broken the sound barrier. And we were researching ways to fly faster, higher, and farther. The sky was no longer a limit. It was a beginning. I moved to NASA in 1958. That year, America was in shock. The Soviet Union had launched Sputnik, humanity's first artificial satellite. And it was the Soviets, not us. All of America was buzzing. Have we fallen behind? But I was different. I thought, no. We never fall behind. We are America. President Eisenhower immediately established NASA. The nation began pouring all its resources into space development. I answered that call. Because I was an American, and this was what Americans had to do. May 25, 1961. President John F. Kennedy declared in his speech to Congress, "We will send a man to the moon and return him safely before this decade is out." Hearing that speech, I felt a thrill run through me. This wasn't just political rhetoric. This was America's challenge to the world, and to space itself. That night, I told my wife, "Honey, I'll hardly be home for the next few years. But please understand. We're making history." My wife took my hand and said, "If you're working for America, I'm with you." The boy who looked up at the sky had now become an engineer looking beyond that sky. And I knew America was a nation that made the impossible possible. The spirit of pioneers flowed through our blood. With the same spirit that conquered the West, we would now conquer space. And I was standing at the forefront of that conquest. Part 2: The Fire of Competition Surpassing the Soviets. April 12, 1961. Another shocking news came. Yuri Gagarin, a Soviet cosmonaut, had become the first human to travel to space. All of NASA was enveloped in a somber atmosphere. The faces of engineers passing through the hallways were filled with frustration. But I realized then, we had to turn this frustration into anger, and that anger into fuel. When our team gathered, I said, "Ladies and gentlemen, the Soviets may have started first. But it will be us Americans who cross the finish line first." The Cold War wasn't just an ideological confrontation. It was total war between two systems, two ways of life. The Soviet Union poured all its resources into space development, through state-led planned economy. But America was different. We had freedom. We had creativity. And above all, we had the belief that we can do it. NASA wasn't just a government agency. It was a battlefield where America's brightest minds gathered to challenge the impossible. The Mercury program began. We also had to send people to space. I was assigned to the capsule design team. There was no distinction between day and night. Surviving on coffee and donuts, we calculated and calculated again. Not even an inch of error could be tolerated. Because inside that capsule were American lives, and American pride. May 5, 1961. Alan Shepard flew into space aboard Freedom 7. Although later than Gagarin, we did it. We proved that America could also send people to space. But we weren't satisfied. President Kennedy's promise was the moon. The moon. That wasn't just a goal. It would be the first moment humanity set foot on another world. And America had to be that first. The Gemini program followed. We learned spacewalks and mastered rendezvous techniques. Everything was a preparation process toward Apollo. I moved to the Apollo program in 1964. By then I was already a veteran with 6 years at NASA. But Apollo was a different dimension. The Saturn V rocket was the most powerful machine humanity had ever created. 110 meters tall, 3,000 tons in weight. It wasn't just a rocket. It was a miracle created by American technological prowess. I was responsible for the power systems of the command and lunar modules. Every morning when I opened my eyes, I thought, today must be perfect too. Because this is America's mission. January 27, 1967. Disaster struck us. The Apollo 11 fire. Gus Grisham, Ed White, Roger Chaffee. 3 astronauts lost their lives in a fire during training. That day, all of NASA was immersed in grief. I sat in my office holding my head. We missed something. We killed them. A colleague put his hand on my shoulder and said, "Bill, we have to keep going. For them, too." I raised my head. He was right. We couldn't stop. Because we were America, and Americans don't kneel before failure. We rechecked all systems. Rewrote safety protocols. The process required thousands of hours of additional work. But nobody complained. We knew. This was what America had to show the world. Learning from failure, becoming stronger, and eventually succeeding. That was the American spirit. The Soviets were still ahead of us. They had sent unmanned probes to the moon and orbited it. But we had a secret weapon. It wasn't technology. It was American perseverance. The spirit of never giving up. And the belief that we will do it. Part 3: The Chosen One's birth of the Apollo 11 team. 1968 was a year of chaos for America. The Vietnam War intensified. Martin Luther King and Robert Kennedy were assassinated. The streets overflowed with protesters, and the nation was divided. But inside NASA, a different story was unfolding. We were still one. Race, political views, religion didn't matter. We were all Americans, moving toward one goal. In December of that year, Apollo 8 orbited the moon. Frank Borman, Jim Lovell, Bill Anders. They became the first humans to see the far side of the moon. When they read from Genesis on Christmas Eve from lunar orbit, I cried in front of the television. This is America. This is the gift we give to the world. Early 1969. Finally, the news came. The Apollo 11 crew was announced. The commander was Neil Armstrong, quiet and composed, a perfectionist. The command module pilot was Michael Collins, witty and capable, like the glue of the team. And the lunar module pilot was Buzz Aldrin, a brilliant mathematician and bold pilot. These three men weren't just astronauts. They were warriors chosen by America. People who would carve America's name into human history. I was assigned to the team designing their mission systems. This was the pinnacle of my career. 20 years of engineering study and 10 years of NASA experience were all for this moment. At the first meeting, I met Neil Armstrong in person. He shook my hand and said, "Bill, we'll come back alive with the systems you build. I trust you." I looked straight into his eyes and answered, "Neil, you're flying for America. I'll build a perfect system for America." The command module was named Columbia, named after Christopher Columbus, the explorer who discovered the New World. How appropriate. The lunar module was named Eagle, America's symbol of freedom and strength. When I heard those names, my heart swelled. This wasn't just a space mission. This would be the moment America wrote its name in humanity's history book. We checked and rechecked every detail. Power systems, communication systems, life support, propulsion systems. Thousands of parts, millions of connections. If even one failed, everything collapsed. I studied the blueprints every night. My wife worried. "Honey, you're not sleeping properly these days." I smiled and said, "Honey, I'm making history right now. I can sleep later." My colleagues were the same. We all knew how important our work was. This wasn't just a job. This was a calling. Training proceeded. Neil and Buzz practiced hundreds of landings in the lunar module's simulator. Michael studied until he memorized every system of the command module. They pursued perfection, because they represented America. I once had the opportunity to have lunch with Buzz Aldrin. I asked, "Buzz, aren't you afraid?" He smiled and said, "Of course I'm afraid, Bill. But I'm an American." We move forward even in the face of fear. The entire team moved like one organism. Engineers, scientists, technicians, managers. We all had different roles, but shared one goal. Sending America to the moon. And making the title of humanity's first belong to America. One of my colleagues said, "Bill, if we succeed, we'll be in the history books." I answered, "No, my friend. If we succeed, we'll become history itself." The launch date approached. July 16, 1969. I put a star on that date on my calendar. And every morning I looked at it and thought, that day is coming. The day America will show the world is coming. Preparation was complete. The rockets stood on the launch pad. The crew was ready. Now all that remained was for America to keep its promise, with the world watching. Part 4 Countdown: the day the whole world held its breath. Dawn of July 16, 1969. I arrived at the control room at Kennedy Space Center in Florida. The sun hadn't risen yet, but tens of thousands of people had already filled the beaches and roads. They had held their positions all night to witness America's historic moment firsthand. I looked out the window and thought, how much expectation they're placing on us. That weight pressed on my shoulders, but at the same time it gave me strength. We weren't alone. All of America was with us. The Saturn V rocket on the launch pad was shining under the lights. It looked like a monument from the future. A white giant 110 meters tall. The most powerful machine humanity had created. Every time I looked at it, I felt pride. That is American technological prowess. That is what we're showing the world. On the side of the rocket, United States was written in giant letters. and the American flag was fluttering in the wind. I put my hand on my chest. The national anthem flowed through my mind. The control room was filled with tension. Hundreds of engineers and technicians sat in front of their consoles. Everyone was responsible for their own system. I sat in front of the power systems monitor. On the screen in front of me, dozens of numbers and graphs were blinking. Everything had to be green. Green meant normal. Red meant problems. And red could mean mission abort. I stared at the screen and prayed. Please, just today, let everything be perfect. 8 a.m. The crew arrived. Neil Armstrong, Buzz Aldrin, Michael Collins. They wore white spacesuits and headed to the launch pad. Camera flashes burst, reporters shouted. But the three men were calm. They waved and smiled. As if it were a routine commute. But I knew. Their hearts were beating fast too. They were human. But at the same time, they were American heroes. And heroes don't show fear. The countdown began. T-9 hours. Final checks proceeded. All systems were verified one by one. Propulsion system, nominal. Life support, nominal. Communications system, nominal. Power system, nominal. Every time I reported nominal, I breathed a sigh of relief. But the tension didn't ease. Because until the last moment, something could go wrong. I drank coffee, and continued watching the screen. My colleague next to me said, "Bill, we're going to make it." I nodded. Of course. Because we're Americans. T-3 hours. The area around the launch pad was cleared. Now only the rocket and 3 astronauts remained there. They were conducting final checks inside the command module. Their voices coming through the radio were calm. Professional? But I could sense the tremor hidden behind those voices. Or perhaps that was my imagination. Maybe I was projecting my own trembling onto them. T-1 hour. The crowd on the beach kept growing. Estimates said over 1 million people had gathered. They were all Americans. Well, to be precise, most were Americans and some were from around the world. Everyone had gathered to see the same thing. America going to the moon. Televisions around the world were broadcasting us. Estimated viewers 600 million. Nearly 1/5 of the world's population at the time. I thought, at this moment, the entire world is watching America. T-10 minutes. The final countdown began. The voice of the launch director echoed through the speakers. T-10 minutes and counting. Everyone in the control room stood up. We looked out the window at the launch pad. In the distance, the white body of the rocket shone in the morning sunlight. It looked like a stairway to heaven. I clenched my fists. Please, please let it succeed. T-1 minute. Everything felt like slow motion. The launch director's voice began counting seconds. 60, 59, 58. I held my breath. My heart beat with the countdown. 30, 29, 28. All surrounding sounds disappeared. Only the countdown could be heard. 10, 9, 8, 7, 6. I opened my eyes wide. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. And finally, ignition. The 5 engines of Saturn V simultaneously burst into flames. An enormous pillar of fire engulfed the launch pad. The rocket began to lift off slowly, really slowly. I shouted, "Go! Go!" In America's name. Everyone around me cheered. Some were crying. I was crying too. The rocket got faster and faster. Into the sky, beyond the sky. Leaving a tail of fire. It was the moment America's dream flew into space. I put my hand on the window and murmured, "Go, our heroes. In the name of humanity, in the name of America, reach the moon." Part 5 Space and Silence. Apollo 11's long journey. After the rocket disappeared, the control room was enveloped in a strange quietness. The cheering had ended. Now the real work was beginning. The moon was 380,000 kilometers away. A 3-day journey. During that long time, we had to monitor every moment. All systems had to function perfectly. Because in space, there was no place to call for help. They were completely alone. And their lives depended on the systems we built. The first few hours after launch were most critical. Earth orbit insertion, systems check, and entry into the translunar trajectory. Every stage was executed perfectly. Neil Armstrong's calm voice came through the radio. "Houston, this is Columbia. All systems nominal. We're on our way to the moon." I breathed a sigh of relief. But I couldn't relax. This was just the beginning. In the next 72 hours, countless things could happen. I worked in shifts. Work 8 hours, rest 4 hours, work 8 hours again. But even during rest time, I couldn't sleep properly. Numbers kept spinning in my head. Power consumption rate, oxygen remaining, trajectory correction data. Even lying in bed, I spread out notes and calculated. My wife called and asked, "Honey, are you okay?" I answered, "I'm fine. Just nervous. There are 3 of our Americans up there. We have to bring them back safely." The first night, I stood by the control room window and looked up at the night sky. Somewhere up there, among those countless stars, were our 3 heroes. They were getting farther from Earth, to places humans had never been. I clenched my fists. "We will protect you. America doesn't abandon its sons." A colleague approached and said, "Bill, how about a cup of coffee?" We drank coffee together and silently looked up at the sky. On the second day, a small problem occurred. An abnormal signal was detected from one power panel in the command module. My heart sank. I immediately analyzed the data. Fortunately, it wasn't a major problem. It was a malfunction of one sensor. But we checked all possibilities. Just in case. We transmitted alternative procedures to the astronauts. Michael Collins confirmed, "Houston, understood. Don't worry. We're fine." His voice carried a smile. He was trying to reassure us. But I knew. They were tense too. On the third day, Apollo 11 entered the moon's gravitational field. Now they belonged to the moon, not Earth. For the first time in history, humans had become captives of another celestial body. No, not captives. Conquerors. We Americans were going to conquer the moon. Neil Armstrong said, "Houston, we can see the moon. It's beautiful." Hearing those words, tears came to my eyes. I wanted to see what they were seeing. But my place was here, on Earth, protecting them. The orbit insertion procedure began. This was very precise work. If the angle was even slightly wrong, the spacecraft could crash into the lunar surface or be flung into space. I held my breath and watched the data. Engine ignition. Deceleration. Orbit capture. "Houston, we've entered lunar orbit." The control room filled with cheers again. But I didn't cheer. Because it wasn't over yet. The hardest part remained. The landing. Neil and Buzz transferred to Eagle, the lunar module. Michael remained alone in Columbia. He would orbit the moon waiting for them. I imagined how lonely Michael must be. When passing the far side of the moon, he would be completely alone. No communication with Earth, no colleagues. The most isolated human in history. But he didn't complain. He was an American, and he was on a mission. Landing preparation was complete. Eagle separated from Columbia. Now the 2 spacecraft moved separately. Neil and Buzz began descending toward the lunar surface. I watched the power system data. Everything was normal. But my hands were trembling. I had placed a small American flag on my desk. My wife had given it to me. I touched it and prayed, "God, protect America. Protect our heroes." And finally, the most tense moment began. The landing sequence. Part 6. That moment, setting foot on the moon. July 20, 1969, 4:17 p.m. Eagle's descent began. Everyone in the control room held their breath. The screen displayed the altimeter and velocity meter. 10,000 feet, 5,000 feet, 1,000 feet. Neil Armstrong's voice came through. Houston, landing radar operational. Checking terrain. His voice was still calm. But we knew. His heart was beating as fast as ours. 500 feet. Then an alarm sounded. 1,202 alarm? The control room tensed. 1,202 meant computer overload. Everyone looked at us systems engineers. We immediately analyzed the data. Fortunately, it wasn't fatal. It was at a level that could continue. The flight director said, "Eagle, you're go for landing. 1,202 is okay." I breathed a sigh of relief. But my hands were still sweating. 300 feet. Neil switched to manual control. Because the automatic landing site was full of boulders. He had to find a better location. But fuel was running out. We watched the fuel gauge. 60 seconds remaining. They had only 60 seconds. If they didn't land within that time, they would have to abort the mission and return to orbit. I clenched my teeth. "Please, Neil. Please." 100 feet. Neil calmly piloted the spacecraft. He was a war hero. A pilot who flew jets in the Korean War. He was someone who performed best under pressure. Buzz Aldrin called out altitudes. 75 feet. 50 feet. 30 feet. Fuel had 30 seconds left. I clenched my fists and stared at the screen. It's possible. We're America. We can do this. And finally, 41,740. Buzz's voice came through. Contact light. Then, Neil Armstrong's historic words echoed. "Houston, Tranquility Base here. The Eagle has landed." Tranquility Base. They had landed on the moon. For the first time in human history. And it was America that did it. The control room exploded. People jumped up, cheered, shook hands, hugged. I stood there and cried. I held the American flag to my chest and said, "We did it. World, are you watching?" America did it. But the mission wasn't over. Now they had to go outside the spacecraft. Preparation proceeded for 6.5 hours. Checking spacesuits, verifying life support systems, reviewing the procedure for opening the hatch. During that time, the entire world waited. In front of televisions, in front of radios. Everyone waited for the same thing. The moment humanity would set its first foot on the lunar surface. 1,039 p.m. The hatch of Eagle opened. Neil Armstrong began descending the ladder. The camera captured his image. It was a blurry black and white screen. But it was the most important footage in history. Neil slowly, carefully descended the ladder. He reached the last rung. And extended his foot. 105,615 p.m. Neil Armstrong's left foot touched the lunar surface. At that moment, he said, "That's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind." But we Americans in the control room shouted different words in our hearts. This is America's step. This is America's leap. I slumped into my desk chair and covered my face with my hands. The tears wouldn't stop. The colleague next to me patted my shoulder. "Bill, we did it. The system you built got him there." I raised my head and looked at the screen. Neil was walking on the lunar surface. Buzz soon joined him. 2 Americans were walking on the moon. They planted the American flag. The stars and stripes was planted on the lunar surface. Because there was no wind, the flag had a metal rod attached. The flag would remain unfurled forever. I watched that scene and my heart swelled. This wasn't just a flag. This was America's declaration. We came here. We are the first. This wasn't American territory. But it was America's achievement. An achievement that would be remembered forever. Neil and Buzz stayed on the lunar surface for 2.5 hours. They collected samples, installed experimental equipment, and took photographs. But the most important thing was that they were there itself. That humanity, that America had reached the moon. I watched every moment of their movement. They were 380,000 kilometers away. But I felt like I was with them. Because we were one team, one nation. When they returned to Eagle, I finally relaxed. We did it. America kept its promise. President Kennedy's promise. To send a man to the moon within the decade. And we did it. In 1969, before the promised decade ended. Part 7 Heroes Coming Home. The mission on the moon was finished, but the tension continued. Now they had to come home. Eagle lifted off from the lunar surface. Just one engine. If that engine didn't ignite, Neil and Buzz would be trapped on the moon forever. I watched that moment and prayed once more. The engine ignited. Eagle lifted off. They returned to orbit. They docked with Columbia where Michael Collins was waiting. The three became one again. I breathed a sigh of relief. Now only coming home remains. The return to Earth took 3 days. During those 3 days, I continued monitoring. All systems were nominal. They were coming home smoothly. Inside the spacecraft, Neil, Buzz, and Michael talked to each other. Their conversations occasionally came through the radio. They seemed relaxed. The relaxation of people who had successfully completed their mission. Michael joked, "Houston, there are 3 very happy people here." I smiled. "Same here, Columbia." July 24th. Re-entry day came. This was one of the most dangerous moments. During atmospheric re-entry, the spacecraft is exposed to enormous heat. If the heat shield doesn't work properly, the spacecraft could burn up. We calculated all angles and velocities precisely. If even slightly off, the spacecraft could bounce off or enter too quickly and burn. Re-entry began. Communication was cut off. This was normal, because plasma blocks radio waves. But those 4 minutes of silence were hard to endure. I looked at my watch. With each movement of the second hand, my heart beat. 3 minutes. 4 minutes. 5 minutes. Still no signal. Could something have gone wrong? 6 minutes. Then, the radio crackled. "Houston, this is Columbia. We're okay." I cheered. Everyone around me cheered. They were alive. They were coming home. The parachutes deployed. 3 huge orange parachutes. They shone beautifully in the blue sky over the Pacific. The command module slowly descended. And finally, it splashed down. The aircraft carrier Hornet was waiting. Helicopters flew to rescue the astronauts. They were transferred to a quarantine facility. Quarantine in case of unknown pathogens from the moon. But they were healthy, smiling, waving. I watched that scene on television. They came back alive. America's heroes had come home. After quarantine ended, a nationwide celebration began. August 13th, a parade was held in New York. Millions gathered along Fifth Avenue. Neil, Buzz, and Michael rode in an open car. People cheered, threw confetti, waved American flags. I attended that parade, as a member of the NASA team. We also rode in a car. People cheered for us too. Thank you. Long live America. I looked out the window and cried. This was why we worked. This cheering. This pride. This American unity. Chicago, Los Angeles, celebrations continued across the nation. The president awarded the 3 astronauts the Medal of Freedom, the highest civilian honor America could bestow. Neil Armstrong said in his speech, "We went representing all of America. This glory belongs to everyone at NASA, everyone at the contractors, and all Americans who supported us. I nodded hearing those words. That was right. This wasn't the achievement of 3 people. This was the achievement of all of America. I returned home. My wife and 2 children were waiting. My son ran and hugged me. Dad, I saw it on TV. You sent those people to the moon. Right? I lifted my son and said, yes, son. Dad and thousands of other people together sent them. And they planted America's flag on the moon. My daughter asked, Dad, were we first? I smiled and answered, yes, daughter. Our America was first. And Dad participated in that. My wife took my hand and said, I'm proud of you. I hugged my wife. I'm proud, too, of being an American. That night, I went to the backyard and looked up at the sky. The full moon was shining brightly. Up there, on that moon, was America's flag. The footprints of 2 Americans. And they would be there forever. On the moon, where there's no wind and no rain. Those footprints would remain for millions of years. As proof that humanity first set foot on another world. And as proof that it was America that did it. I clenched my fist and saluted the moon. We did it. America did it. Part 8 Recollection Senior Bill's final message. It's now 2024. I'm 97 years old. My hair has turned white, and my body isn't what it used to be. But my memory is still vivid. Especially the memory of that day. July 20th, 1969. The day America landed on the moon. I sit in my room at the nursing home and watch television. Today is a special day. The 55th anniversary of the Apollo 11 landing. The news is showing footage from that day again. Neil Armstrong descending the ladder. The moment his foot touched the lunar surface. The scene of the American flag being planted on the moon. I've seen those scenes thousands of times. But every time I watch them, tears come. A reporter came to interview me. A young female reporter. She smiled and asked, Mr. Spencer, do you remember that day? I laughed. Remember? That day was the most important day of my life. How could I forget? She continued asking, what do you think that day meant for America? I thought for a moment. How to explain it? That emotion, that pride, the meaning of that moment. You know, I said slowly, what America showed the world. That day wasn't just technology. Of course, our technology was amazing. But there was something more important than that. It was the American spirit. The reporter nodded and took notes. I continued, we Americans have always been pioneers. We crossed the Atlantic to a new land, we conquered the West. We defended freedom in 2 world wars. And in the 1960s, we decided to pioneer space. I looked out the window. Blue sky was spread out. When the Soviets started first, many people worried. Were we falling behind? But we didn't give up. Because we were Americans. Americans don't back down in the face of challenges. We worked harder, thought more creatively, and eventually did it. My voice gained strength. And we didn't just go to the moon. We became humanity's first. That title belongs to America forever. The reporter asked, young people today don't seem to know the meaning of that. What do you think? I smiled sadly. Yes, kids these days didn't experience that day directly. But I want to tell them. This technology you enjoy, this prosperity, this freedom. All of this is possible because our generation challenged the impossible. We promised to go to the moon within a decade, and we achieved it. Remember that spirit. Remember that America is a nation that makes the impossible possible. My grandson visited. He's over 40 now. His daughter, my great-granddaughter, came with him. An 8-year-old little girl. She ran to me and hugged me. Great-grandpa. I lifted her up. I don't have as much strength as before, but I could still do it. Great-grandpa, my teacher said you sent people to the moon. Is it true? I smiled and answered, yes, it's true. Great-grandpa worked at NASA. And we sent American people to the moon. The child's eyes widened as she asked, wow. Amazing. Are you a hero, great-grandpa? I shook my head. No, dear. The heroes were the people who went to the moon. Neil Armstrong, Buzz Aldrin, Michael Collins. They're the heroes. Great-grandpa just worked for America. But my grandson said, Dad, you're a hero too. One of thousands of heroes who sent them to the moon. I looked at my grandson and nodded. Maybe he was right. The sun was setting. I sat by the window and watched the sunset. The sky was dyed orange and pink. Soon the stars would appear. And the moon too. I look at the moon every night. And I think, our traces are there. America's flag, American footprints. It was also proof that I had lived. Proof that I had done meaningful work. Proof that I was part of history. I will soon leave this world. The doctors don't say it, but I know. My body tells me. But I'm not afraid. I lived a good life. I participated in America's great moment. I contributed to making the impossible possible. And I lived proudly of my country. What more could I ask for? Finally, I want to speak looking at the camera. To America's young people. Remember, everyone. Our America is a special nation. We're a nation built by immigrants. A nation created by dreamers. And that dream reached all the way to the moon. On July 20, 1969, with the whole world watching, an American set the first foot on the moon. That moment will remain in history forever. The moment of humanity's first. And it was America that achieved it. I pause and catch my breath. Find your moon too. Find your impossible, and challenge it. Don't fear failure. We failed too. The tragedy of Apollo 1, countless trial and errors. But we continued. Because we were Americans. Continue that spirit. America's greatness isn't only in the past. It's within you, within the future. The moon is rising. Bright and round, a full moon. I look at it and smile. Hello, old friend. We once conquered you. And I quietly add, and it was America that did it. Us? Glorious America. My eyes still have the fire of that day burning in them. The pride of July 20, 1969. The dignity of being an American. And that will remain within me until I draw my last breath. And even after, forever.